So like what we're doing at Resort Pass right now is we're basically talking about with extreme certainty what we want to get done in the upcoming quarter, and then what we think that will mean for 2 quarters from now. And so we're basically pretty tight on a half yearly basis, but that rolls. So every quarter we're rolling that forward to look, well, what did we accomplish this quarter? Are we feeling like we're done with this work? And what does that mean for the work that's coming up? And so with that, if you can do that, then the idea of the annual like event of planning, which consumes a month of people's time and is exhausting and very distracting, becomes less of a huge annual event and more of a, let's just keep doing the regular planning that we're always doing. And maybe the annual nature of it is, are there a couple really big swings or bets that we want to make in the following year? Because making those bets means that in subsequent years, that's going to be really important for the business.
Get ready for the Product Tea with Leah, your fun-sized dose of business, tech, growth, and product chatter. I'm your host, Leah, and it's time to spill the tea. Back for a hat trick, the third and hopefully also the last time. The growth wizard behind Lyft and Patreon, now sharing his wisdom at Reforge and some other companies. He's not just a podcast host and a newsletter writer. He's a family man, chilling in the Bay Area with his crew and Baxter the Retriever. He's also a friend. Welcome back, Adam. Fishman.
Thank you. It's lovely to
Fishman.
be here.
Did you see how I butchered this introduction with just the pronunciation? Adam Fishman.
You know, I get a lot of mispronunciations of my name, despite the fact that it is 2 very straightforward words to pronounce, fish and man. Sometimes I get fisherman. Sometimes I get Fleischman, Fisher. I've gotten Fisher before. Yeah, really all the things. So, you did fine.
Good.
You did fine.
Okay, thank you so much. Can you introduce yourself to the fools that may not know you and also include what you've been doing in the last 6 months since the last time that we recorded an episode?
Sure. You did a really good job with my intro, so thank you. Clearly, you've done your homework. It's like we know each other, even though I've never met you. Never. This is the first time we're ever having an interaction. So my name's Adam. I do several things. I write a newsletter, the Fishman AF newsletter. I also record a podcast now where I interview tech leaders, other leaders, just generally interesting people who are also dads. And we talk about parenting topics. And I don't think there's anything else like it on the internet. So I'm pretty proud of that. And it's a thing that I'm passionate about as a dad myself. I am teaching at Reforge. I'm an executive in residence or an expert in residence, whatever the E stands for. I don't really know. I teach the growth series and growth leadership, which I also created with my homegirl, Elena Verna, who you may know. I don't know. Do you know Elena? You ever heard of her?
Okay. No, never heard.
Cool. Yeah,
I will look her up though afterwards.
You should. Yeah. She's not very big. She's done like a couple things. I mean, she's all right. Yeah. I also have a advisory business. So sometimes I do interim executive work, interim CPO, interim head of growth, things like that. Sometimes I just work with a bunch of founders on product building, growth modeling, growth strategy, all the above. And that's the thing. And I have some opinions on things that I've shared.
Okay.
One, I think, is what we're going to talk about today, which is my opinion on...
It's the favorite time of any leaders. It's the favorite time of the year. What is it? Yeah, that's what you call it, right?
It's the most wonderful time of the year, and I'm not talking about Christmas time.
No, we're talking about growth and product planning for the next year.
Yes.
And it is time to do it. And we want to talk about it again today. Last time we talked about how NPS is bullshit and some other metrics. It was a very successful episode. People really loved it.
Yep.
If you're listening to this and you have not heard it, go tune in. So there's 2 perspectives on what we're going to look into today. When it comes to yearly planning in general, which we always ask ourselves, why are we doing this if we're not using it anyways afterwards? And I think we have some opinions on this. But maybe let's just start from the perspective as an operator. And maybe I can go first if you allow me to just like kick it off.
Yes.
Because I had a lot of fun as a PM with my teams to also prepare the topics for my team on how I see the next year starting to unfold. And I picked up a couple of tactics that I felt that were always quite useful. And there are also some things that were not that nice. So ironically, in a lot of scale-ups that grow really fast, you usually don't have a company strategy that is really clear. You just like stumble from quarter to quarter. And then at some point you have quarter four. And then if someone says like, well, we still don't really have a strategy for the next year, but like, let's just put 4 quarterly plannings next to each other, right? Like, and that's kind of it's kind of like the yearly planning that we start to do. And I think, unironically, some things that I picked up during my, also mostly at my time at Small PDF, to be honest, is if you start to plan something where you should factor in learnings. So as you go on, you will learn about what is going to work and so forth. So for instance, I can be confident that I can grow the core business by 50% with my team. But it's very unlikely that I know what I will do in Q4 at the same time. So as you go more into the future, you start to become fuzzy, and it's almost like I don't want to call it a funnel,
Funnel.
but in this case, it actually is a funnel
Yeah.
where at in the very intermediate or the very close future is where we can be specific, whereas we get extremely unspecific towards the end of the next year. But I felt that the next 2 quarters are probably the end of any accuracy for any product for planning. And I think one of the things that I took with me is that you still need to sit down, and for yearly planning, you still should also start to compare all the different initiatives that you have. And what I do with that is that we start to gather around and we put down the ideas that we feel like make the most sense, but then make them comparable.
Hmm.
And one of the most simple examples of this can be that you say like, okay, like this is the amount of effort this takes. So you're not sitting down with engineers specifically to figure out how much effort it is, but like, how difficult is this to build, like in general, like from a scale of 1 to 10, just like as an initiative by itself, and like how much uplift does this bring to the business, also on a scale of 1 to 10, because if you put numbers to it that are more specific, it gets very, very wishy-washy.
Yeah.
And making things comparable is actually harder than it sounds. But if you have, 20, 30 of these post-its, then you can actually start to do something. But as you go forward, I think the more you come to the end of the next year, the less specific it actually should be, and everything else does not work anymore. And yeah, do you have any operative advice for product teams or growth teams on how they should do this? How would you approach this?
Yeah, I mean, I generally agree that, in development parlance, we would call that the cone of uncertainty, right? The farther out you are from the event actually taking place, the less you know about it, and the less confident you are, and the more risky it is. And confidence might be, I'm not even confident that 4 quarters from now we're going to be working on this because I don't know about the 3 quarters leading up to it. That might cause us to do something fundamentally different in that fourth quarter. So, my number one piece of advice when you are thinking about planning, the planning process, when you do not have a company strategy, is to start with this sort of intersection of, okay, absent a company strategy, we do know that all companies want to grow year over year, right? And there are certain generalizable targets that make sense given the stage of your company. So, in order to go from series X to series Y, we need to be able to show this kind of growth. And if you can start deconstructing that growth into, well, that means we're going to need some number of new customers. And that means those customers are going to need to stick around. And that means they're going to need to spend a certain amount of money with us. That's the acquisition, retention, monetization components of this. Even if you don't have a company strategy, you can start to deconstruct your ideas and your opportunities into those components and the influence that the work will have on those components. And I think a really good North Star, absent a company strategy, is just rooted in what are the single set of biggest problems that are getting in the way of acquisition, bringing new customers in, keeping people around, giving them repeatable value, and getting them to spend more money with us. What are the problem areas for our customers? What are the opportunity areas? And if you can start to deconstruct into those 10, 12, 20 different things, and you can put them on equal footing in terms of what do we know about these? How risky are these? What have we done in this area before? You start to get a comparable baseline where you can say, well, initiative X, solving problem X and solving problem Y, we can compare on these dimensions. And problem Y is actually going to give us bigger return than problem X right now. So you start to build a sense of sequencing, and you may not know, well, I'm going to do all of this in Q1 and all of this in Q2. And by the way, when I get to Q4, I'm going to be doing all of this. That's fine. But the most important thing is to say, what is the order of operation in which I'm going to tackle these different initiatives and these problems? And it doesn't matter how long it takes you to get them done. It's just the number one next most important thing for us to work on is this problem. When
Mhm.
that is done, then we will go to the next one, and or we will reevaluate to make sure the next one is the most important problem. And in that way, it becomes sort of a rolling planning process. So like what we're doing at Resort Pass right now is we're basically talking about with extreme certainty what we want to get done in the upcoming quarter, and then what we think that will mean for 2 quarters from now. And so we're basically pretty tight on a half yearly basis, but that rolls. So every quarter we're rolling that forward to look, well, what did we accomplish this quarter? Are we feeling like we're done with this work? And what does that mean for the work that's coming up? And so with that, if you can do that, then the idea of the annual like event of planning, which consumes a month of people's time and is exhausting and very
Yeah.
distracting, becomes less of a huge annual event and more of a let's just keep doing the regular planning that we're always doing. And maybe the annual nature of it is, are there a couple really big swings or bets that we want to make in the following year? Because making those bets means that in subsequent years, that's going to be really important for the business. So anyway, so
Yeah.
that's how I think about it. And my advice as an operator, absent a company strategy, is to just deconstruct your ideas and the customer problems into a way where you can get them all on the similar playing field, and then just sort of start to rank the priority of those based on the urgency and importance of the problem and the impact of the business. That's a really, really good starting place. And that's the
Yeah.
majority of strategy work. And then you actually may inform the company strategy based on that. So
Yeah.
that's where I start.
I, that is a great point because I wanted to talk about this for a second. So, like the strategy vacuum, in the absence of a strategy, you can actually fill quite a bit of it in if nobody took care of it. Now, that is not the ideal way. I still think that you should do some kind of strategy idea from the top down because the fundamentally great thing about a strategy is it tells you in what kind of time frame we talk about, usually 5 years, but it does not put deadlines anywhere. And this is actually how annual road mapping should be as well in some way.
Yeah.
So I like this idea that you had when you said like, okay, we're sequencing, right? So like once this bigger thing is done, and if it is done, maybe it's also going to depend on the other thing. So it's not just about maybe we do A and B, but B we can only do if A is successful, and then it might actually take longer.
Right.
Because if you attach too many dates in the future, then you start to think like, oh, I'm behind on the overall plan, and that's never a good thing. But like sequencing it, just saying like, okay, here's how we try to evaluate this, and then the next thing comes is a very good thing.
Yeah.
So there's one thing that I wanted to highlight also with you because we're also running independent businesses. And I don't know whether you're doing it, but I definitely do yearly planning for myself, but a little bit in a different way. So I usually talk to this woman on the internet, Elena or whatever her name is.
Never heard of her.
So yeah, me neither. So I always talk to her about every like so at the beginning of the year, I'm just like, okay, so this is my yearly goal. It's total bullshit goal, right? So like I have a specific amount of revenue that I make, and now the next year I want to make this kind of money. And my personal time is still negotiable, right? So like how much time that I put into the business is variable. And I don't mean this in a point of like, how can I work myself to death? But depending on the number that you attach to what you want to reach in the next year in relation to this year, and this is something that I think a lot of product and growth teams should do as well. So the year on year growth, the higher you put the target, the riskier your bets have to be.
Yes.
And the riskier bets have to be, the more unlikely they are also going to succeed. And the more likely you should also have a scenario okay, what do we do if it does not work out? Or how much time do we give ourselves as a stretch goal to kind of figure out whether it does work?
Yeah.
And what I mean with that is, I had a fantastic episode with Andrew Davis where he said, like, look, if you change 1% to any of your growth levers, which is either acquisition, retention, or monetization, then you see that acquisition, you have an average leverage of like 3%. On retention, you have 9%. And on pricing and monetization, you have 15%. So If you feel frisky and you want to risk something, then you start to play around with monetization, because this is usually where most companies are unoptimized.
Yeah.
So if somebody comes to you and says, like, Leah, you need to score 20, 30% more with your team in the next year on the revenue top line, which is, by the way, not a good goal, but let's just say that this is what you have to do,
Sure.
then you also need to come up with a risky bet. Do you see it also in this way? And how do we prepare for failures? Like, I love planning also, like, so what happens if it doesn't work? And when do we also define that it actually doesn't work? Because I've also fell into the trap of like perpetually optimizing something until it did work, and then 6 months have passed.
Right. That is certainly a risk. I would agree that the ambitiousness of the target is reflected in the ambitiousness of the work that you do and the risk associated with it. So you're right. Like doing optimizations, which are, hey, we'll eke out a percentage point here or there, or we're going to make this marginally better. Making something marginally better gives you marginally better returns. But taking a big swing, which could be, if you're a growth practitioner, adding a new loop. If you're a product person, it could be building a net new parallel product, sort of like a Horizon 2 product or Horizon 3 product or something like that, that you can then cross sell and drive more adoption of, and it influences everything, right? Acquisition and retention and obviously monetization. But yeah, you're going to be wrong 70+% of the time. And so even in a scenario where you've really effectively done as much as you can de-risking something, because you can't perfectly de-risk. So what do I do with that? How do I handle this idea of failure? One is try not to build all of the bets into your planning process. One, you're not going to execute them all. It is literally impossible. Something is going to take longer than you think. If it's a big stream of work, it's going to get delayed because there's just no way around that, right? It's too uncertain. So don't build them in if you can. Start with a very kind of flat line. If we do nothing, how do we grow? Now, if we layer in optimizations, how do we grow? And by the way, now we're going to have our 3 to 5 bets, and we're not going to assume that 100% of these pay off. Maybe one of them pays off. And the gain in that first year of a bet paying off is really quite marginal. It's typically in years 2, 3, and so on where you really get a compounding effect from that, especially if you're in a subscription software business. And so you prepare the team by saying, be conservative in when a bet will land and just how successful it will be. And don't bake 100% of this upside into any sort of planning process. And there is temptation from the leadership team, and there's a lot of push to do that, to be like, no, you have to bake it in because we have ambitious goals and our board is saying X and et cetera. And the other thing that I will mention is there is temptation to, as an executive, to ask the question, well, what do you need? You've got 5 bets here. If we gave you more people, wouldn't you be able to get all 5 of those done? Or wouldn't you be able to be more successful? Do not fall victim to that trap. It is a trap. Executives don't realize they're doing it. But the reality is, like, if I said, Leah, go hire 10 people for your team tomorrow, and you were like, yes, those people aren't going to materialize for months, quarters, and
Yeah.
then they're going to ramp, and then you're going to start working. And by the time they're actually productive, you're like 9 months out or something. Now, no one likes to hear that because executives are like, well, that's slow. Why can't you do it? The reality is it's human nature. It takes time to find good people if you have a high hiring bar. It takes time to bring them into the company. It takes time to train them and get them onboarded and get them close to the problems that you're working on. Like, this is just the reality of it. It takes time for that to
Yeah.
seep in and for you to absorb it. And so don't fall victim to well, if we just give you more people tomorrow, you could get this done, right? It's tempting to be like, oh, yeah, I like more people. Sure, I can do that. But yeah, shame on us as executives for dangling that carrot in front of people's faces.
I think I want to tap into this, like, just for 1 second, and then we can go actually to the other perspective, which is actually from the executives level, which I think
Sorry, I
is very
jumped the gun.
interesting for both parties. No, but like, this is actually very good, because I think there's 2 things that you can actually do as an operator that a lot of people do not even consider when they're leading a team. And I think the first one is, it's a little bit of what you said. So let's say we have to also consider the psychological well-being of people in a team. if you constantly go for absolutely ridiculous big swings, and I am someone that tends to do that, right? Because I
Sure.
always try to break out of, I'm an innovation PM. Like that's always what I have been. I always try to do for the big swings. And it's playing to my quality right now as an advisor because that's what people usually also expect from me. But if you're a PM in a team where you hope that these people don't hate you after a year through their guts, then better make sure that you have a mix of things that you're more sure about and those that are you're not so sure about, because that also matters. If you go with a team and they just have one miss after the other, which is statistically very probable if you're going for things where you're just like 40% right or 30 or 20, which is the case for really big swings, you should consider that, right? So like
Yeah.
there's also the mental well-being. We need to have some kind of successes because a lot of companies are still only like they're still only celebrating successes rather than also like, hey, this was a really good growth initiative. It didn't came to be, but we learned something quite important. No matter what people say, they still are over, we're still over indexing on the actual success, of
Yep.
course, in some way. The other thing is, if you kind of flip this to the side and you think about, so how much resources should we invest or how much people could I use for anything? I think that's always the wrong kind of way to look at things because, as you said, we love to hire more people. Why do we love to hire more people? Because then we can say, oh, I am managing 8 people now. Last year, I managed 2 people. So
Yes.
I am 4 times more important right now. So I try to make the resources work.
Yep.
And that is a very fundamental flaw. And maybe now we can use this as a bridge now to go over to the executives, because the way that I think about this and also how I did it quite a few times is I had an idea and I did not think about, how many people do I need to kind of get this done? Because you can put 30 people on a really little tiny feature.
Sure.
100%. You can. You can also do it with 2 people. But what you can do is you can actually try to map, okay, what is realistic for a team to execute this? And let's say a team is 5 people, 2 front ends, a designer, the PM, and maybe someone from UX, whatever, like research data analyst, whatever.
Hmm.
But let's say you have a team unit of 5 people. So how does this look like if I have one team? How does this look like if I have 2 teams? And how does this look like if I have 3 teams? If you have 3 teams, suddenly now you need to have a group product manager. So you start to also lose this acceleration and this like bringing it all down to the road in the end. And I think mapping a business case to that is very interesting because you might find out that with one team you get to 3 million, with 2 teams you might get to 5 million in the same time span, and with 3 teams suddenly it just does not work out anymore because suddenly now you have to put on another resource or you need to hire more or like we don't have the internal resources and so forth. And this is the way how you create good projects that then go into a yearly roadmap planning, because some projects can only be executed if you also have the people to work with. And that's an actual good purpose for a roadmap planning that goes over a year, because if I need the people and the staffing for something that I only start in like 9 months, then I should start right now if it includes more than 5 to 10 people.
Yep.
That's just how it is. Yeah. So I don't know whether you have some thoughts on this, but what are some really bad habits or behaviors that you see executives do when they do any go to market, any growth planning in this regard?
Yeah. So the first one is the one that I talked about, which is like, if I waved a magic wand and gave you 10 more people, doesn't that mean you get, if your team's 5 people currently, now you have 10, now you have 10 more people. Does that mean you're 3x more productive? Yes, it does, right? No, it doesn't. There's coordination costs. There's this idea, not to use the gendered term, of the mythical man month or woman month or person month, which
No,
is
we can leave
like,
it with the mythical man months in this case. It's fine.
yeah, which is like adding more people doesn't linearly increase our productivity, right? There's a point of diminishing return there. So that's sort of like one thing that I feel like executives know this and they kind of forget for some reason. So that's sort of one. The second thing is when you're an executive and you do kind of top down planning and you're like, we're going to double next year in revenue. And that revenue is going to come because we're going to improve retention by 50%. And then you're like, bake that in. We're going to do it. And then you go to the team and the team's like, we haven't once ever worked on retention before. We have no idea if we can improve retention by 50%. We have no ideas. We haven't talked to anybody about why they're leaving. And the executive team's like, oh, okay, well, 50% though. We're going to do it because that seems like a good benchmark. And then that gets baked in without a proper reconciliation of a bottoms up balance of how are we going to get there. That can be very problematic. And so I have seen executives be very guilty of this. We made this mistake a few times at companies that I've worked at. And it was really painful to start the year and say, ooh, that's a big lever with a big target. And we currently have no idea how we're going to move it. And as you just got like closer and closer, and maybe you stacked up some failures or some failed experiments or whatever, and you get to a point where you're like, huh, well, the goal starts tomorrow and we haven't gotten any success yet. And then from that day forward, you're just under the gun to try and figure out a solution to a problem that you didn't have to create, that didn't have to be created. But because you didn't kind of reconcile the what is truly possible with what we think we want, to reconciling this tops down and bottoms up, that you get yourself into all kinds of trouble. And this is a thing that executive teams are guilty of. Yeah. So that's like a second one. And there are, there are more. Did you really?
I'm back.
Did
It's
Did
okay.
you really
No,
leave in the
it's this
middle of
time.
our recording?
No, my browser crashed. Go on.
I hope this makes the cut.
I hope it does too. I will leave it in.
Yeah.
Stewie, my sound engineer, you can leave this in. This is fine.
Leave it in. Just Leah's
Yeah.
computer Leah's browser crashed midway through our recording. So yes, that was the second one. Is this just like complete mismatch between tops down and bottoms up? Like we have no idea how we're going to get there. That's why I suggest that teams, even before the executive team comes and hands down the tablets from on high and says 100%, we're going to grow retention by 50%, take the problem areas of customers and turn those into, here's what the opportunity is here, and here's what it's actually going to impact if we solve this. Because then you've got all these components, you've got all the Legos, and you can say, oh, we got to improve retention by 50%. Well, I don't really think that's possible, but I can go in my Lego bin and I can find all my retention opportunities, and I can say, here are all the things that we think are opportunities for us that would improve retention. Now, again, 70% chance that a lot of these are wrong, but at least we've got the components so we can start to say, we need to get started on this stuff, de-risking these investments and things like that. So that's a big one. And
I think that's a good point. Yeah,
I was going to say, and by the way, that like shit rolls downhill, right? So the executive team goes to the operators and says, this is what we want to see. But the board is going to the executive team and sort of challenging them on, are you being ambitious enough? Hey, we've got this other portfolio company that's doing twice what you're doing. Never mind if it's in a completely different industry, customer segment, whatever. But like there's pressure. There's always this two-way kind of pressure. So yeah, that's definitely a thing.
I think if I could go back in time and tell myself some advice when I was still more on the operative side as a PM, and it doesn't really matter whether it was growth or just flat out product work. I think what I would have done is I would have gone and I would have said, like, hey, spend 10, 20 minutes to talk with your CEO or with your leadership team to understand what's important to them. And I don't mean like now company strategy or customer problems or all that garbage that we, like that we usually care about 99% of the time. Really about, okay, what are your goals? Where do you feel the pressure from?
Yeah.
And I know this is awkward for people to kind of ask the leadership team, especially if they're PM or growth, oh, that's not my point. I'm like, yeah, that is exactly your point. Because if you understand how your leadership team ticks or your boss, what kind of, I mean, you don't have to ask them like, hey, so how much money do you get if you reach your goals? That's not what I mean. But like, you should still kind of know what is important to them. What do they need to figure out? Because if you know their wiggle room, then you know your wiggle room.
Yeah.
Because what they cannot change is not going to be changeable by you. So you need to kind of figure out your garden.
Yeah.
And I've fallen prey to this as well because I always felt like, I can talk about this for my last head of product gig. I thought that for some reason it's clearer to the people that work under me what I need than it was for them.
Mm.
And I had always a couple of ICs who were really, really good in questioning me, like, hey, but Leah, I'm not clear on this. And I'm like, did I not talk about this? Okay, shit, damn. I think I need to clarify this again, right? So, like, hey, here's why we're doing this. And I think the problem really stems from if you're in the leadership team, you talk about strategy every week, specifically in these dreaded Monday morning meetings. Like, why did we do this? How is the capital allocation looking like that? What is going to happen in the next funding round? You've been probably also part of like 30 to 40 investor meetings in the last 2 months,
Yep.
that kind of stuff. So for you, this stuff is becoming really, you have it's coming out of your ears. But for the people under you, some of them have heard it maybe 2 or 3 times. One guy was probably sick completely and he only heard it once and probably didn't really get it.
Right.
That is insidious because for me, it's like, yeah, company strategy, clear, clear as day and night, right? Like for me, it was always clear. But you can do this as good as you want if you do not communicate it really clearly downwards. And it's not just about them helping you create it, it's really about just communicating what we know. Yeah, there's just no way that you can over communicate this. I don't know how you see this, but like for me, that was always the case in every yearly planning or any planning for that matter. There's always someone in the room that didn't get the message,
Yep.
and not because they were lazy, it's just because I didn't explain it well enough.
Yeah, or like you mentioned, they were out sick that day, or they, were distracted by something going on outside of work, or there was a critical bug that they were trying to deal with while you were having conversation with them. Like, there's any number of reasons why just telling somebody something once or even twice doesn't land, right? Like
No,
when you think about marketing messages and you think about sales touches, right? What do we say? You have to see it like 7 times or hear from a same salesperson 7 times before you respond. That's why I get so many friggin' cold emails, right? And I hate them, but it's not wrong. Like by the time that 7th email comes in, I'm either saying stop messaging me so you at least get a response. Anyways, I don't want to go down that path. But yeah,
no,
7 times. Why is it okay for us to have that rule for our sales teams and our marketing teams, but not for how we communicate internally? And I've always had this leadership principle, that is over communicate until everyone gets it, and
no.
constantly checking in to understand if people on my team get it. If you're a stakeholder, do you get it? If you're a PM and you're managing other people, do you get it? And so, yeah, it's critical. And we often, as executives, I think we're like going blue in the face by repeating something. And if you were to run a survey of your team and say, here are the things, do you know about these things? I guarantee you a lot of them would say no. Because it's like a giant game of
No.
telephone. Every hop you make down the leadership chain, people lose like 50% of the information.
More,
More.
more, probably more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Imagine you make this mistake with just one of your directors. So you have 4 directors and you just miss one of them. The entire chain that is below that means they cannot ask questions to their director or their GPM or whatever it is.
Yep.
And yeah, you have this problem. So what I started to do when I do these plannings, because I hate plannings and things that I hate, I don't do that well. I don't know about you, but that's just usually how it goes,
It's
right?
true.
But I think a very effective, it's not even a hack, it's just like one of these oddities, is that once you have set up the planning, let's call it a marathon or like the planning milestone, you know how this goes, right? It's like here, all hands here, and then another one 2 weeks later, last time to check in before this, then the planning should happen over there, and so forth, is to really make sure that in these kind of milestones where we say like, okay, now the planning has to be finished, and this is specifically true in bigger companies, there are some milestones that we cannot move anymore. For instance, the board needs to approve something, or specifically if you have to let go people or hiring plans or whatever, like there's always a set date that needs to be kind of happening.
Yep.
I think it makes a lot of sense in a very specific cadence, 3 days or a week before, to have critical meetings with everyone, either in a one on one, at least with the direct reports that you have, on these topics before you have the actual closing meeting on the deadline. Because what you do not want to run into is having some open questions on the deadline, because that's where bad decisions start to happen, because you have no more runway, you just make some decisions and then something happens. And this, again, what this means is that I put it in my one-on-ones that I used to have. Luckily, I don't have any more direct reports right now, but like I put it in my
Just me.
one-on-ones that whenever I do,
You have me.
yeah, you're my only direct report. whenever I have one-on-ones, I put it in there and I say like, okay, we're gonna talk briefly about the annual planning. So where are you? What is the thing? Like, can you give me some kind of draft that you have? And that is extremely helpful because the one thing that you do not want to be is the executive that is getting caught with her pants down. And yeah, so where is this particular unit's plan?
Yep.
Well, they're not ready. You cannot go there and just say like, well, they're not ready, but it's not my fault, because it is my fault.
Yes, it is.
And that's where you have to overplan.
Yep.
And I think this is where executives are just also very, very annoying, me included.
Yep. Yep.
But you have to be, because you burn your fingers once on that. It doesn't, you don't, once you become a well-paid executive, the excuse, well, it was not, he forgot it, is not working anymore.
Right. Nobody told me. No, you just have to, you're supposed to know, right? That's what they pay you the big bucks for, is to know.
Yeah.
There's no
Yeah.
one watching over your shoulder. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of people watching over my
Wh-
shoulder, mostly imaginative people, but it's like,
Well, you have an orange cat that's watching over your shoulder.
yeah, it's true. She's on my lap
Yeah.
right now, so yeah, it's gonna be fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Okay.
this is what I've encouraged the PMs on my team who own specific large surface areas or large pieces of the product strategy is, okay, you need to have your strategy for the marketplace, because you own the marketplace. You own how customers experience that. You own the user experience of it. You own how search works. You own all these things. Even if we don't know how big we need this to be next year, you still got to have some thoughts on where your opportunity areas lie. Start there, and then we can fill in and sort those opportunities based on what are the most important levers of the business as we go into next year. And so, but it doesn't go well to start thinking about that after the goals are handed down from on high, because it takes a while to think through thoroughly your opportunity areas and your individual product strategy and things like that. So start without that guidance. Just get going, and you can always refine. Strategy is never finished anyways. It's always
Yeah.
iterative. So got to start. You start tomorrow, it's too late. Start today.
It's too late. Yes, I'm going to start today, Adam. That's a very good point. Like maybe one more question, just in general, like because I'm quite active on Reddit. When I talk to product managers, I actually see what they're doing and how much they hate their lives, and a lot of them hate their lives currently.
Wait, when you hold on,
Because
I have
they're
to ask you about this. You're
yeah, go
quite
ahead.
active on Reddit. Does this mean
Yes,
you are reading or you are commenting or both?
I'm commenting. I'm posting there as well, and I just talk to people there. Yes,
You're
yes,
that
I'm an actual human,
you're
Adam.
that's very bold of you to wade into Reddit and start
No,
commenting. No?
no, actually, I'm doing pretty good because I get a good fact check there whether I'm one of the LinkedIn lunatics, that has completely lost the ground under her feet.
Yep.
And yeah, no, so what's interesting is that depending on the social network that you go to, I think you get a different kind of feeling of what product management is about. LinkedIn is a very polished, very ideal world in terms of what it all is about. Here's how you should do growth. Like you have people like you and me that are shitting on other people's stuff on like how they do their things and so forth.
Never.
But on Reddit, you have a lot of people, a lot of PMs who are working in FANG companies, and they're very, very open about how miserable it is. So let's say I'm a growth PM at some kind of FANG, or like so just like a bigger company. It doesn't need to be one of the huge ones, but like it can also be quite a big one. And I feel like I have absolutely no influence over growth. And I think what the company is proposing is completely wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot stand behind this. And I'm just maybe at this point only collecting my paycheck, but I'm not happy with this because I also can relate to this. I've been at this position myself. What should people do if they just do not stand behind the strategy? Because if you don't, or if you don't understand it as well, and let's say you cannot influence it, I mean, what are you supposed to do? Should you just cower and shrimp up and just like wait, or what should you do?
Shrimp up. That's a new phrase that I've just learned. Shrimp up.
Yeah, like a
Yeah.
shrimp, right?
Oh,
Like you just curl up.
oh, I,
Yeah.
I know what you mean, but I've never heard
Okay.
anyone describe that before. So that's great. Yeah. I mean, look, there's kind of a couple of paths that you can go down. One is you can do what a lot of folks do, which is leave. They go in to start a company, right? Or they go and join something really early because they're like, I want to have more say. I want to be in charge. I have ideas. No one's listening to me. I think that's fine, but I think you realize when you go start a company that eventually you realize that you're actually not really in charge. There's always somebody else that's in charge. You're more of the orchestrator, right? It's not like I say a thing and then a thing happens. Like, no, that doesn't work that way. So that's the thing. People can leave, but you don't necessarily want to do that. So the second thing that a lot of people do is they just kind of chill out and they sort of embrace this like learned helplessness. Well, nothing I do is going to make a difference, so I'm just going to go through the motions and punch the clock and whatever. And that's the quiet quitting folks or whatever that terminology is. I mean, that's fine, but it's not very fulfilling. You still get paid, great, but like, I don't know, it's not great. I think the third thing that
Yeah.
you can do is you can figure out what you can control and you can do really well in that area and you can make a big deal about it. And so, because you're going to have to chip away at your right to influence, no one's just going to hand that to you at one of those gigantic companies. And so, not only do you have to do a great job in your area, but you have to make a big deal about what that great job looks like and what it contributes. And honestly, if you're at Google and you're working on something and it generates $1 million for the business, on a business that's generating tens of billions of dollars a quarter, that might seem small, but there are thousands and thousands of product managers who are doing their $1 million contribution, and many are not even contributing that. And so you have to figure out like, how do you position that success and start to like climb your way up the influence ladder. And the way that you do that is you become a trusted person who gets things done and does deliver results, even if those results are not $10 billion, even if they're single digit millions. That
Yeah.
matters. It all matters to a business. So again, it's not going to be gifted to you. It doesn't happen overnight. You got to put in the time. I think my personal level of impatience is one of the reasons that I've never gone to a FANG company despite having that
Mhm.
opportunity. So yeah, so that's me.
Yeah.
That's my own personal.
And I think, look, it is not easy. I also understand the frustration, especially in this market. I mean, we all would love to work in a startup that has Adam or Leah at the top. I don't know why, but like, apparently that's a thing.
I wouldn't.
But no, now seriously.
Yeah.
Now, I think, these 30, 60, 90-day plans, right? Like for getting into a new position.
Yep.
I am actually writing an article for the opposite 30, 60, 90 days on how to get away from a company. So here's what I'm thinking.
Ooh,
Oh, you have to. Oh, that's clever face, right?
I'm
So
intrigued.
here's what I'm thinking. Yes. So here's what I'm thinking. I can talk about this specifically. So when I decided to leave Small PDF in at the end of the year, it was exactly to the end of the year because in Switzerland we have a cancellation period of like 3 months or whatever. It's just like we have very good labor laws, right? But
Mm-hmm.
like that doesn't matter. I knew about 6 months before that something is not going well.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very intent about putting the company on a pip for myself. So what I did is I said, like, I cannot grow here anymore. I feel like the strategy is not going into the direction that I want to, like the longer term plan. And I said, well, if I cannot have buy in with this and I also cannot grow, then I need to kind of start looking for another job, but also look for someone that, or for some kind of growth opportunity until I'm gone. Because people only start to think about, okay, so where should I go next? What should I do then? Like how do I grow afterwards? But it turns out if you have a really good plan, and I did for almost 6 months, I was doing good work at the company, but I was also starting to get bolder, right? Like I started to experiment on things. I
Mm-hmm.
started to try out new concepts and also made sure that if they did work, that I put them also in my CV. And about 2 to 3 days before I actually left, my team was managing also to put in a new initiative, or like something that we released that was one of the most successful growth initiatives because we were incredibly lucky as well. I realized that it's also luck, but which was also a result of me starting to become much bolder,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I did not fear anymore, like, oh, Leah is going to let go or anything like this, because I already quit at that point.
Right.
And this is like once you have that in your mind, that you're not afraid anymore of leaving, instead of becoming a lame duck, as we call it in politics, really stand up for yourself, try to experiment and try to do some bullshit. What are they going to do? Fire you? You're already going.
Right.
So it's like, I mean, don't risk the company. That's not what I mean. Like, still try to do stuff in the sense of the company. But if you deliver good impact, that is also speaking for you with the next employer. And I always tried to leave on a good note, of course,
Yeah.
as well. And I think it is definitely worth it.
Yeah.
I don't know whether I'm too idealistic here at this point. I don't know.
I mean,
Maybe.
I don't think so. I mean, it feels good to do great work, right? And I don't think what you're advocating for is walking into your boss's office and like smashing your laptop on the table. That's not the kind of bold that you're talking about.
Not that I ever did that.
No, never.
Maybe twice.
That's it. Maybe twice. But we're not talking about like do things that spell career suicide. We're talking about take risks with the bets that you're making at the company, which is sort of sad that a lot of people feel like they can't do that until they're ready to get out the door. But if that's when people feel safest to make those bets, then you do you know? So that's what we're talking about. I'm not talking about like Office Space style, unscrew the cubicle walls and knock those down and then like whatever else, steal money from the company.
Unless that is a product that you offer, like deconstructing office cubicles. In that case,
right,
that would be correct
IKEA.
because you're serving, you're producing the core value there. All right, Adam, we've already reached the end of this episode. Thank you so much for joining today. Where can people reach you? What are you up to? What should they listen to? I highly recommend the Startup Dad podcast. I think you're doing something very, very special there. And where else can people find your stuff?
Yeah, mostly you can find it on my newsletter, fishmanafnewsletter.com. That's fish and man, and then AF, the letters. And then I think you all know how to spell newsletter. So that's a place. And then, the Startup Dad podcast is pretty much everywhere you get podcasts. It is an interview show, which not everybody loves, but it's a different kind of interview show. I really haven't found anything like it, which is why I created it, because I wanted to have these conversations. It's important to me. And, I'm always looking for new guests too. So if anyone has an interesting story or experience with parenting that they want to share, reach out, hit me up on LinkedIn, reply to my newsletter. I read all those things. I read everything that people send me on LinkedIn, even if I don't always have time to respond. Yeah, that's it. That's the deal.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
That's really good. And I also want to say one of the reasons why I'm not on your podcast is because I don't have children.
It's true.
But I was considering getting a couple of them just so I can be on your show. So we'll see.
Finding them somewhere.
We'll see how that goes.
Just go pick them up at the store. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Adam. We're done. Boom. That's it.
End of recording.
Thank you so much for listening to The Product Tea with Leah. If you don't have enough yet, you can subscribe to my podcast right now on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can head to my website, leahtarin.com, which is leahtarin.com, where you can find much more of my material or just want to work with me.